Those were not St. Elmo's lights, but a very real SpaceX rocket launch. But this is not an amusement attraction. This is real ground under his feet.
But an illegal construction project 20 years ago opened the door to some major
nature. However, the workers who recorded this video claim the opposite.
Here we arrive at Warren's Gate, named after Charles Warren.
Jerusalem has always stood at the center of history, faith, and conflict. But what happens when unusual signs begin appearing in the land itself? Sparks from colliding stones in the hills. The ground shifting as millions of creatures surface. A column of fire spiraling upward. A silent pillar of light hovering over the city. And beneath it all, sealed gates and hidden chambers under the Temple Mount, drawing global attention. Are these isolated incidents or pieces of a larger pattern forming around Jerusalem? Stay with me until the end and decide for yourself. If this video challenges you, like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more. Jerusalem did not tremble that day, yet the stones flared as though something beneath them had exhaled fire. On a barren ridge overlooking the ancient contours of the city, two masses of rock pressed against each other under geological strain, and from their collision erupted sparks that resembled the violent arc of electric welding. There were no power lines suspended above them, no hidden machinery humming beneath the soil, no human intervention guiding the contact. Still, light tore from stone as if an invisible current had surged through the earth's bones, and for a brief instant, the hillside glowed with a brightness too deliberate to dismiss as random friction. The phenomenon was small in scale, yet disproportionate in implication, because Jerusalem is not merely terrain, but testimony layered in mineral and dust. These are not anonymous rocks scattered across an indifferent wilderness, since they have borne the weight of temples razed and dismantled, of armies marching and prophets warning, of prayers whispered into cracks and crevices where tears once dried. When stone moves in this city, it does not move alone. It drags centuries of memory with it. When rock emits light, it feels less like chemistry and more like interruption, as though the ground itself has decided that silence has reached its limit. The sparks did not linger, yet their brevity sharpened their impact, because what unsettles the mind is not magnitude, but timing. In Luke 19:40, Jesus declares, "If they keep quiet, the stones will cry out," and the statement arrives not as poetry, but as confrontation. The religious leaders demanded restraint. Christ answered with reversal. If human voices fall still, creation itself will testify. If mouths close, matter will speak. The hierarchy collapses, and the inert becomes witness. When two stones in Jerusalem grind together and release light without visible cause, the question shifts from how to why, from mechanics to meaning. Scripture repeatedly frames turning points not with spectacle but with disturbance that precedes revelation. A bush burns without being consumed in Exodus 3-2. The earth quakes at the crucifixion in Matthew 27-51. In Revelation 16:18, a great earthquake accompanies the final outpouring of wrath, shaking what seemed immovable. These moments do not begin with collapse. They begin with pressure. What happened on that hillside could be catalogued as natural friction, yet the setting complicates the explanation, because Jerusalem is the axis of promise and contention, the stage upon which prophecy has historically unfolded with unnerving precision. If stone begins to spark under unseen force, then something beneath the surface is shifting, compressing, intensifying beyond comfort. The light itself may be brief, yet ignition often precedes conflagration, and the smallest flash can foreshadow a chain reaction that no authority can suppress once it accelerates. The city continued its rhythms, pilgrims walked, prayers rose, traffic moved, and no official decree interpreted the event as omen. Still, the image remains. Rock striking rock, fire born without flame, silence pierced by light. If the stones are not meant to speak, then why do they flash? The ground did not crack, yet it moved. Near Jerusalem, in a stretch of earth that appeared ordinary under the sun, the soil began to ripple as though a pulse traveled beneath it. What seemed at first like a trick of light slowly revealed itself as motion, and that motion multiplied until the surface resembled a living carpet woven from countless bodies pressing upward. Millions of centipedes writhed below the crust, their segmented forms folding and unfolding in relentless coordination, transforming stable terrain into something disturbingly animate. There was no explosion, no dramatic fissure splitting the landscape, yet the horror did not require rupture because the instability emerged from beneath rather than above. The soil did not open to swallow structures, yet it undulated in waves subtle enough to avoid headlines and powerful enough to unsettle anyone watching. Each ripple suggested breath, as if the land itself inhaled and exhaled through a membrane of churning life. The sensation was not of destruction, but of animation, and animation where stillness once ruled carries a particular kind of dread. Jerusalem is accustomed to tremors of history, yet this movement did not arrive through armies or proclamations, since it rose silently from organisms hidden just below visibility. The creatures did not invade from outside. They had always been there, layered beneath the dust that has absorbed prophecy and conflict for millennia. What changed was not their existence, but their surfacing, their collective stirring transforming passive ground into restless flesh. In Revelation 6:14 it is written, "The heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places," and the imagery refuses comfort because it describes displacement at the structural level. Stability dissolves. What appears fixed proves temporary. The verse does not begin with annihilation. It begins with movement. When earth near Jerusalem ripples as though it possesses lungs, the metaphor becomes difficult to ignore because foundations are meant to reassure rather than breathe. The spectacle of innumerable segmented bodies grinding against one another does not merely disturb the eye, it compresses the chest with a suffocating sense that something primordial has surfaced. Each articulated form bends and recoils in mechanical precision, creating the impression of a single vast organism masquerading as terrain. Although biology can classify the species and explain their clustering, explanation does not neutralize the dread, because classification cannot calm the instinct that recoils from a landscape behaving like flesh. There is no roar, no shriek tearing through the air, yet the synchronized friction of countless legs produces a silent roar of movement that seems to vibrate beneath the skin. The mind searches for solidity and finds motion. The senses expect dust and encounter pulse. What destabilizes the observer is not merely the existence of these creatures, but the overwhelming immensity of their number, because quantity alters perception and converts irritation into portent. A handful of crawling bodies would evoke disgust. Millions transform the ground into a living tide. Scale distorts proportion. Magnitude rewrites meaning. What could have been dismissed as infestation expands into something resembling a sign, and once that shift occurs, the psychological boundary between natural occurrence and prophetic symbolism begins to erode. Jerusalem occupies a central spine within Scripture, a city repeatedly portrayed as hinge point between covenant and judgment, promise and upheaval. When its soil appears to convulse with hidden life, interpretation cannot remain purely scientific, since the setting amplifies every anomaly. Revelation 6:14 describes a sky receding like a scroll being rolled up, and mountains displaced from their positions, imagery that communicates not decoration, but dislocation. The architecture of reality trembles. The framework slides. What seemed immovable reveals itself as provisional. Against that scriptural backdrop, a field that ripples as though it inhales and exhales becomes charged with unsettling resonance, because breathing implies vitality and vitality implies agency. Above, the skyline stands composed, stone walls gleam in the sun, and daily routines proceed without interruption. Yet beneath that composure, a dense ocean of chitinous bodies churns with relentless persistence. There is no siren to mark the moment, no headline proclaiming upheaval, yet the surface betrays the agitation below. The Earth does not fracture dramatically. It undulates with contained intensity, as though pressure gathers without yet exploding. If the ground associated with prophecy begins to move like muscle beneath skin, then stability becomes a question rather than an assumption, and what once felt anchored begins to feel provisional. When the very foundation seems to breathe, what remains truly fixed? Flame did not spread across the ground. It rose like a verdict. In a parched stretch of land near Jerusalem, where brittle grass and dry wind coexist in uneasy silence, a column of fire twisted upward into the sky with violent elegance. What began as ignition did not remain horizontal as ordinary wildfire does, because the blaze tightened into a spiraling vortex that pulled heat, ash, and oxygen into a single rotating pillar. The air itself appeared to be seized and wrung like fabric in invisible hands, while embers orbited within the column as though trapped in a furnace without walls. Witnesses did not describe a random burn pattern, since the phenomenon possessed structure, height, and terrifying coherence. The inferno did not crawl, it ascended. The motion resembled intention more than accident, and that distinction altered the emotional weight of the scene. Fire has always carried dual meaning in Scripture, serving as both purification and judgment, presence and destruction. In 2 Peter 3-7 it is written, "But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men," and the verse does not present flame as incidental, but as reserved, appointed, stored for a decisive hour. The imagery refuses neutrality, because it frames combustion as culmination rather than coincidence. When a vertical inferno coils upward near a city so deeply embedded in prophetic narrative, symbolism presses against the surface whether one invites it or not. Earlier, the ground had rippled with hidden life beneath its crust, suggesting instability below. Now heat surges skyward in visible fury, suggesting escalation above. The sequence feels less isolated and more progressive, as though pressure that once moved silently underfoot has found expression in open combustion. What had been concealed agitation becomes manifest intensity, and the transformation from shifting soil to ascending blaze amplifies unease. The vortex did not drift aimlessly. It maintained form long enough to imprint itself on memory, and that persistence magnified its psychological impact. Dry wind fed the spiral, while sparks scattered outward in incandescent arcs, painting the horizon with brief streaks of orange light that seemed almost ceremonial. The land did not merely burn, it performed. Jerusalem has witnessed fire before, from the destruction of the temple to conflicts etched into its chronicles, yet each recurrence carries resonance because history saturates its terrain. When flames tower in disciplined rotation, the mind cannot help but recall prophetic passages that link final reckoning with consuming heat. The association may be resisted intellectually, yet it arises instinctively. From restless earth to rising conflagration, the trajectory intensifies, and the pattern appears to climb in scale and visibility. If the ground unsettles and the air ignites in sequence, then the question no longer centers on isolated incidents, but on momentum, because momentum suggests direction. When fire no longer appears as mere accident, but echoes language reserved for the last days, the atmosphere itself feels charged with implication. If flame begins to spiral where prophecy has long echoed, what stage of escalation has truly begun? Share in the comments whether you see this as a warning written in flame or merely a coincidence carried by the wind. The sky did not thunder, yet it burned. Above Jerusalem, suspended in the dark canopy, like a colossal candle planted in invisible ground, a luminous column held its position without flicker or fall. There was no trailing arc like a meteor tearing through atmosphere, no sonic rupture to announce entry, no mechanical hum to suggest aircraft or drone. The radiance simply stood there, vertical and unwavering, as though the heavens themselves had lowered a signal and fixed it in place, for all who dared to look up. Observers strained to categorize what they were seeing, yet classification faltered because the object neither moved with predictable trajectory nor dissolved like ordinary light. It remained. It hovered. It glowed with a steadiness that felt deliberate rather than accidental, and that steadiness intensified the unease. Exodus 13:21 declares, "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light." And the ancient description refuses to fade quietly into metaphor. The pillar was not decorative, it was directional. It did not entertain, it guided. When a vertical blaze appears above the same land where that narrative unfolded, memory does not remain dormant. Luke 21:11 warns of great signs from heaven, placing celestial disturbance within the sequence of end-time tremors, and the phrase carries weight precisely because it elevates the sky from backdrop to participant. Earlier, the soil had rippled with hidden motion, then flames spiraled upward from dry terrain. Now the atmosphere itself seems to host an apparition of fire that neither advances nor retreats, as though escalation has climbed from beneath the surface to the vault overhead. The pattern expands dimension by dimension, moving from ground to blaze to firmament. The luminous form did not explode dramatically, nor did it drift beyond the horizon in cinematic fashion, since it vanished without residue, leaving no smoke trail and no debris to analyze. Its disappearance felt almost surgical, as though an unseen hand extinguished a wick and withdrew the evidence. What remained was not ash, but question. If earth convulses, if fire ascends, and if the heavens display silent radiance above the city of prophecy, then the convergence feels less random and more orchestrated. If a pillar of light stands over Jerusalem once more, what is it illuminating? Beneath the visible city, a door waits in silence. Deep within the northern tunnels of the western wall, beyond the stones touched daily by pilgrims and tourists, an ancient sealed entrance known as Warren's Gate rests behind layers of history and tension. The passage dates to the Second Temple period, positioning it closer than any accessible point to where the Holy of Holies once stood, the innermost chamber of sanctity, where only the high priest entered, and only once each year. Massive Herodian blocks surround the site, each weighing dozens of tons, their edges carved with precision that has defied erosion and empire alike. The atmosphere in those subterranean corridors does not feel like ordinary archaeology, because the air carries the density of proximity to something once regarded as the meeting place between heaven and earth. Today, the chamber near that sealed threshold functions as a deeply significant prayer location, drawing worshippers who stand inches from stones that may have bordered the most sacred space in ancient Israel. Their whispered petitions rise through a ceiling of layered masonry, threading through corridors reinforced not merely by architecture, but by centuries of longing. What appears to be stone is also memory, compressed into matter. The Temple Mount above remains one of the most sensitive pieces of ground on the planet, since even minimal alterations to its landscape can ignite diplomatic shockwaves and religious outrage across continents. Political agreements tremble at the suggestion of excavation. Security forces monitor every shift. Cameras observe every movement. The surface remains controlled, yet beneath it, history waits. Ezekiel 44:1, who records a striking declaration. "This gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no man shall enter in by it, because the Lord, the God of Israel, hath entered in by it. Therefore, it shall be shut." The prophet speaks of a closed passage imbued with divine encounter, a portal marked not by abandonment but by sanctification. The language does not describe ruin. It describes restriction with purpose. When an ancient sealed gateway beneath Jerusalem draws renewed attention, parallels surface whether intended or resisted. The rediscovery and revisiting of Warren's Gate do not involve demolition or spectacle, yet the symbolism presses outward, because gates represent access, authority, and transition. A closed entrance near the epicenter of biblical worship evokes questions that extend beyond engineering or tourism. It suggests thresholds. It implies timing. It awakens narratives long considered dormant. As focus shifts downward into the tunnels, global awareness tilts once more toward Jerusalem, where every stone, corridor, and sealed opening sits at the crossroads of faith, prophecy, and geopolitics. If a gate remains shut at the heart of sacred ground, what moment would require its meaning to open? The mountain keeps its secrets, but the soil has begun to answer. In 1999, earth removed from beneath the Temple Mount was sifted grain by grain, and what emerged from the dust did not resemble debris but testimony. Clay seals stamped with ancient insignias surfaced from the rubble. Ritual fragments once handled in sacred service reappeared in human hands, and intricately patterned floor tiles from the temple period confirmed activity that stretches back nearly 3 millennia. What had been discarded as fill became archive, and what seemed like dirt revealed itself as layered memory. Each artifact did more than verify occupation. It whispered continuity. The ground above remains politically volatile and spiritually charged, yet beneath it lies a labyrinth that modern instruments have only begun to trace. Between 2021 and 2024, ground-penetrating radar scanned the subsurface and identified cavities that do not align with random geology. Underground chambers appeared in digital outlines. Sealed staircases materialized in data grids. Hidden vaults registered as voids waiting in darkness, their entrances blocked by time rather than erased. These discoveries do not explode dramatically into the open, yet they accumulate pressure, because every revealed contour suggests something deliberately preserved. Beneath the mount, a vast water reservoir and channel network still threads through stone, engineered with precision that has survived conquest and neglect. The system once sustained worshippers, priests, and city dwellers, circulating life beneath the sacred summit. Water moves silently in enclosed passages, and silence beneath holy ground carries symbolic weight that cannot be measured in liters or meters. This elevated platform stands at the epicenter of 3 global faiths, and each revelation reverberates far beyond archaeology, since political borders, theological claims, and historical grievances intersect at this single ridge. A shard of pottery can spark headlines. A structural anomaly can ignite international debate. The sensitivity is not theoretical, it is immediate. Daniel 9:27 speaks of covenant, interruption, and desecration in connection with the sanctuary, and Matthew 24:15 records Christ's warning concerning the abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place. These passages anchor the temple within an end-time framework, tying its existence not only to memory but to culmination. The references do not treat the site as relic. They position it within future tension.